Okay, everyone. Welcome to the Mining and Metallurgic Society of America webinar series. MMSA is an association of mineral resource professionals whose members represent all facets of mining and metallurgical interests, both domestic and international. MMSA has always been a cohesive group of senior people from the mineral industry. The society is dedicated to increasing public awareness and understanding about mining and why mining materials are essential to modern society and human well-being. The society concerns itself with fundamental principles with problems facing the industry in such areas such as legislation, economics, education, as well as environmental concerns, labor relations, and health and safety. Representatives of the society from time to time also testify before legislative bodies and provide advice to federal agencies. I'm Kristen Guerin-Davy, an MMSA member and the webinar and social media director, and I'll be introducing today's webinar. The title of today's webinar is Effective Advocacy and Engagement on Capitol Hill and in Your Community. We have Emily Hendrickson here today with us. She is president of the Women's Mining Coalition. Emily Hendrickson is the president of the Women's Mining Coalition, a grassroots organization focused on advocating for the United States modern mining industry by bringing constituents together from across the country to communicate with and educate policymakers since 1993. By day, Emily is the manager, External Affairs US for Integra Resources Corporation, where she is focused on the successful development of gold and silver projects throughout the Great Basin of the Western US through meaningful stakeholder engagement with particular emphasis on environmental justice communities and historically underrepresented stakeholder groups. Emily is a vocal advocate for responsible mining and believes that authentic partnerships between industry and stakeholders are vital to a more sustainable future for all. Questions for today can be entered in the chat. The speaker will answer all of the questions after the presentation is completed. Thank you.
Thank you. It sounds to me, always when you hear your bio, I'm like, I need to shorten that down a little bit. It just goes on a little bit too long. So thank you so much for the introduction. And hi, everyone. It's great to be here today. And thank you for having me. We will go ahead and jump right in. So as long as everything cooperates here. There we go. So what we'll be discussing today, so I am kind of being a little bit of a dual representative here, but primarily wearing my Women's Mining Coalition hat. We'll talk about kind of the two organizations I work with and how both of those kind of inform the perspective of this presentation today. We'll get kicked off with kind of a short dive into mining's PR problem holistically, and why some of the things that we're all fighting against, whether on a legislative level or some of the misconceptions folks have in communities about the mining industry, kind of what we can do more proactively as an industry to fight that off and to work towards trust with stakeholders of all types. We'll talk about how to engage with elected and agency officials and how WMC has been doing that since 1993. I had to pause here to acknowledge this photo is of the three founders of the Women's Mining Coalition, Debbie Strusacker, Kathy Benedetto, and Ruth Caraher, all three female geologists from Reno, who in 1993, it was some of the first times we saw some pretty tough legislation in terms of reforming the mining law. And they flew many times out to DC that first year to bring constituents together to talk about kind of those issues from the perspective of people who work within the industry. We've been going back every year ever since, with the exception of a couple of years around COVID. But we're so fortunate to have our original founders still be such an active part of our organization, and they came with us on the 2024 fly-in. So it's just such a great time to be involved with the WMC and getting to learn from kind of those original founders and meeting new people as well. And then we'll talk additionally about kind of a people-centric approach to stakeholder engagement, and again, speaking to driving these messages home, both on Capitol Hill, in our communities, and taking that holistic approach. And then additionally, engaging with tribal nations as a very important piece of this government engagement topic. So yeah, just introduction to, again, kind of fully calling out, I'm wearing a little bit two hats. So Integra Resources, I work with them based out of Boise, Idaho. We have projects in Idaho and Nevada, gold and silver projects. So I come from the project proponent side right now as someone getting ready to head into NEPA. I previously worked for Kinross Gold in Nevada, and so came from an operations perspective. but especially when we get to some of the stakeholder engagement topics towards the end of my presentation today, that's the perspective I'm coming from on those. But I think you'll find that it applies regardless of if you work for an operator or proponent or you're a consultant or anything else. And then the Women's Mining Coalition, this is my second and final year in this position as president with the Women's Mining Coalition. We have over 200 members nationwide, and that fly-in really is kind of our foundational event. But we'll talk about as well some of the other amazing things the WMC is doing. All right, so we'll get into kind of this framing topic, which is overall, what is mining's PR problem and why are we having to go back to DC every single year to keep talking about often some of the same topics? So GlobeScan has been tracking stakeholder perceptions of the mining industry across 31 countries since 2001, and this is in a partnership with ICMM. Within the mining industry, we always talk about telling our story, and I will certainly make reference to telling our story quite a few times throughout the presentation today. But the reality is we live in a post-COVID world, a post-supply chain disruption and current supply chain disruption world that really shone a spotlight on the importance of where our minerals came from. We're also in the midst of the energy transition, and we're seeing a widespread acceptance that mining plays a foundational role in achieving carbon reduction targets. One of the things, and I'll talk about our fly-in that we just had this April, we have never seen such a bipartisan understanding of the need for mining and mine materials, challenges associated with permitting, all of that good stuff. But it's kind of the how do we overcome those challenges is where we're at. So while it's important to continue to tell our stories and humanize the industry, I would argue that we have not achieved the understanding of why mine. We have achieved kind of a begrudging acceptance so that we need mining, but we don't know why we have to mine here. Why do we need to continue mining? Why can't we just recycle things? All of that stuff. So society accepts that mining is essential, but they do not trust the industry to build mines in America's backyard. And it kind of comes from that concept, you know, initially it's tell me about what you do, who you are, and how you do it. And then the industry started, and we did a good job with that. And then we started bringing people out to mine sites, showing them how the process works and bringing them kind of to our side of the table. And now we're really moving towards involve me. And that's where we'll get to with the stakeholder components towards the end. And then additionally on the trust piece, so this Ernst & Young survey asked folks, you know, asked investors rather, which ESG factors are facing the most scrutiny in 2024, and local community impact being way high at the top there. And then all of these things we hear often about, tailings and waste, water and net zero, but just kind of reinforcing that your elected officials are beholden to the will of their constituents, right? At the end of the day, they have to get reelected. And when their constituents are pounding on their doors, they have to have an answer. And so that's why it's really important that we're kind of hitting both targets. I want to touch as well on building trust is a team sport, and one company's mistake is going to have ripple effects for the greater industry. That's definitely something I've seen going to the developing side after having been at the operating side. You know, we're out here talking about how great mining can be for communities and how responsible the industry is and all that. But when, you know, there's a heap leach failure in Turkey, I have to talk in Idaho about how we're doing that differently. And so it's just important to remember that rising tides really do lift all boats. And we always have a tendency in the industry to have that race to second and nobody really wanting to be that first to change how they're engaging with communities. But I think it's a really great opportunity for the industry right now. And a good example to just drive home this concept of regulatory and elected officials facing pressure from their stakeholders is happening right here in Idaho. So the Lava Ridge Wind Project, which I think a lot, especially folks on the renewable space think, oh, it's a renewable project. It's going to be so easy to get my social license to operate. And they tend to not do all of the things that mining is so often doing and engaging with communities. But Lava Ridge is located within the viewshed of the Minnetonka National Historic Site, which was a Japanese internment camp during World War II. And it's not in within the site, but right within that view shed. And so ranchers, farmers, tribal nations, sportsmen, stakeholders from the Japanese American community have all kind of banded together to oppose this project because there really was very little kind of initial community outreach in the early stages of developing that wind project. They have been so loud and continuously pushing against this project that the Idaho House of Representatives unanimously passed a resolution expressing opposition to the project. And then this prompted our Idaho congressional delegation to introduce the Don't Develop Obstructive Infrastructure on Our Terrain Act, or the Don't Do It Act, which would require the U.S. Secretary of the Interior to deny any wind or solar energy project proposed on public land that is disapproved of by the state legislature. And while that's not mining, it's natural resource development, right? And really just kind of shines a spotlight on the importance of this stuff. And so now we'll move into kind of the how and why around engaging with elected and agency officials. So again, since 1993, the WMC has brought together diverse women from across the industry to share our stories and educate lawmakers on the importance of mining to our communities and our families. So we really provide a kind of a different perspective. When a staffer or an official sees a meeting with a mining association or something else on their calendar, they're kind of used to seeing a certain type of people. They know those folks. But we come in just this horde of very excited women who are incredibly passionate about what we do. And we're able to just give it a little bit of spin. And as one of our founders, Debbie Strusacker, always says, we create cognitive dissonance, and we're able to connect with these audiences in maybe some different ways. And so we've been doing this for 31 years, and these are just some of our outcomes here. And I'll talk today when I get into some of the legislation that we were discussing on the Hill in April. It always seems that just immediately after we've been in DC, we see some pretty significant changes. And so how do we do this? So, right, deploying those diverse perspectives, we have seen that bringing a truck driver from an operating mine can be the most powerful thing that you can do. So we have women, even in this photo here with Representative Stauber, you've got someone from an operator, you've got a consultant, and you've got a supplier from Caterpillar. And that's kind of really representative of who we are and what we do. So we're able to showcase the large reach mining has in this country. We often think of it as just the operators, but you've got all of your explorers and developers, all of your suppliers, all of your environmental consultants, everyone. So we have really great representation. We coordinate with affiliate organizations such as MMSA, NMA, SME, AEMA. But we have our unique spin on the message. So we're not just regurgitating the same stuff, but we're all coordinating and making sure we're kind of hitting similar points. We balance the quality and quantity of meetings. So this year we had around 140 meetings on the Hill, maybe 145. If Lindsay is on the call, she can drop in the correct number for me into the chat. So that's a lot of meetings, and it's very dependent on how many women we have come. We had 31 women join us in DC this year. And so we're targeting based on offices that are on key committees like appropriations or natural resources. We're targeting people who have introduced legislation or opposed legislation. We have some members who say, I only want to go to offices who are oppositional to mining, and I want to have those tough conversations. So that's a really important part too, is talking to people who may have no idea about the industry, really incorrect perceptions about the industry. We'll kind of take any meeting we can get. And then follow-up is really, really key here. So every time, as soon as we leave, right before we leave a meeting, we are saying, overall, more than anything, the WMC just wants to be a resource to you. And, we create fact sheets and op-eds and all this information that you can just use as a resource to help inform your decisions. And then another really important piece is finding that common ground. We always say, we're not lobbyists, we have real jobs, and we can find those things to connect on that can keep a conversation moving in a positive light. A really good example of that is maybe the previous line I was in a meeting with a representative from a district that included San Francisco. And the staffer was talking about they were trying to build a homeless shelter, but it had to go through the NEPA process. And that was kind of their first exposure to just how challenging that process can be, and kind of acknowledging that, well, that doesn't just affect the natural resource industry. And that system is largely broken. And then consistency. We come back every year. Something really important to remember is that these staffers are often moving around to different offices and working for different members. And so someone you met with last year, you might meet in a different office this year. We typically open up meetings too by asking, have you met with the Women's Mining Coalition before? And most of the time it's, yes, I've met with you guys before, and they know we're coming every year. And then how do we prepare our members and participants for a fly-in? This year, we really went hard on doing some pre-fly-in training webinars, so some just kind of mining 101. We also empowered our subject matter experts and members within our ranks to help put together these fly-ins. So we had a coal representative with all of the above energy strategy training. Debbie Strusacker did a really fantastic federal regulatory issue training. Liz Arnold did a really incredible just kind of power of advocacy training, and then just a general fly-in information. You wouldn't believe how important it is to know to bring your comfy shoes and then your cute shoes that you keep in your bag and switch them out. So just kind of those points to hit for people who they're not DC people, right? So just doing some of that education. Empowering our committees, and again, those subject matter experts, to draft our issue papers. And I'll talk at the very end of the presentation about where you can go to see the issue papers that we presented in DC this year. Coordinating with those affiliate organizations. And the photo here is from our half-day training and orientation session at the National Mining Association offices. I'll bump down to the bottom bullet here. This is a presentation from Ioneer, and so we always try to really incorporate and involve our sponsors as well. So Ioneer was a great example of kind of a real life project that folks can point to when they're talking about some of these issues that are affecting the industry and affecting the development of critical mineral projects. We have our amazing and incredible WMC manager, Lindsay Wright, who's our dedicated scheduler, is just in relation to one of the aspects of her job around fly-in, but really just honing in on, your 2 weeks out when you can really start scheduling those meetings, coordinating everyone's, I have a meeting at 3 that I can't be in this. So it's important to have that dedicated person. And then providing those networking opportunities for our participants and affiliates. That's another really important part of this fly-in work. So we will dive right into what are the issues that the WMC covered during our fly-in this past April. And what is the situation we were sort of walking into? So we all know it's an election year, so that makes things a little bit challenging in a different way. We have narrow partisan margins in Congress, of course, and it's often what we hear from these offices is, it's an election year, we're not going to touch anything we don't absolutely have to touch. Moving bills along can be a difficult process during a year like this. But what we've seen as an industry is certainly an increase in administrative processes, executive orders, agency rulemakings that really jumped up this year to kind of try to accomplish some of those policy objectives that maybe legislation is not doing. We definitely walked into a situation where there's mixed messaging. So whether it is through, battery mineral processing grants, the Inflation Reduction Act, the infrastructure law, all of these different components that are really earmarking billions for especially critical minerals, but infrastructure development, energy, all of that stuff, mining, we are seeing, is categorically excluded from a lot of funding in these pieces. We know that there is a widespread acknowledgement of the need for minerals, and especially those critical or strategic minerals, and the risks of reliance on foreign adversaries. Again, COVID really shone the spotlight on that, and we've had 2 fly-ins post-COVID, and we've absolutely seen a shift in just the level of education that we're seeing on the Hill. But again, this is not translated to an acceptance of domestic mining. We hear we don't want to mine or get these minerals from foreign adversaries, but that doesn't necessarily mean we do here. We can do it with our friendly nations. And then similar to that San Francisco example, and every year this seems to get better, which is positive, a recognition that permitting delays are truly affecting everything. If we're talking transmission lines, solar, wind projects, all these green projects, they are running into some of these same roadblocks as well. And so diving into some of the specific bills that we were focusing on the Hill this year. So the Senate side, and I've added into this from, if anyone saw the presentation I did with Colorado SME and WIM prior to our fly-in, I've added some updates post-fly-in of what we've seen happen. So the Mining Regulatory Clarity Act, that is a bipartisan bill that's got companion bills on both the House and Senate side. And you'll see the House one down at the bottom from Congressman Amodei. But that's essentially our Rosemont Fix bill. It restores and clarifies mining's rights under the mining law that the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled. It's the mill site claim and the ability to store waste on public land. We feel it is just restoring the status quo to the original interpretation of the mining law. Really positive news on that is that just after our fly-in, a couple weeks after our fly-in, and actually I was involved in a meeting with the Speaker of the House during the fly-in where they let us know that they were going to be bringing the bill to the floor. So we were able to communicate that out to NMA and AEMA, which was really important for them. Brought to the House floor just after fly-in and after a little bit of messiness in the House of Representatives, it did pass the House on May 8th. And then on the 9th, it was referred to the Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources. So continuing to monitor that one. Another really important one that we were able to weave into a lot of our messaging this year was the Mining Schools Act of 2023. And that creates funding for U.S. mining schools for recruitment of new students. So one statistic that's quite staggering is in the U.S., we have about 600 students enrolled annually in mining programs, mining engineering, metallurgy, things of that nature. China has about 1.4 million students, annually enrolled in similar programs. And so when we talk about anything in terms of innovation and processing and technologies and all of this, we don't even have the experts in the United States oftentimes to be looking at these, whether it's, critical minerals, rare earth material, all of that. China is out advancing us just on the education side. And so that's a really important bill that we've continued to discuss for the last couple of years. And then Good Samaritan legislation, which I know MMSA is familiar with, but that amazing pilot liability relief program, that's one of those when we talk about finding common ground. I would say that the Mining Schools Act and Good Sam are spaces where we can spend some time talking to folks and making progress there. And then the only one that doesn't have a mirror there listed is the Western Economic Security Today Act, which would require BLM to withdraw their now finalized Conservation and Landscape Health Rule. Did pass out of the House at the end of April and was also referred to Senate Energy and Natural Resources. Another huge message that, again, we were able to weave into many things was the need for a critical and strategic minerals agency, or just a minerals agency, right? The United States stopped funding the U.S. Bureau of Mines in 1996. And one really powerful graphic that you see on your screen here is something that the WMC has shared, I think, at every single fly-in for the last 31 years, is this net import reliance graph from the USGS. And what's curious about this, and especially in the context of the U.S. Bureau of Mines, is that this first one on the left in the green was created in 1995, stopped funding the Bureau of Mines in 1996, and that's when we started to see that net import reliance really start to drastically increase. And so, we always point out, and you can't see it too well on here, but China is listed as a primary source of these minerals for many of these minerals. And so always pointing out the adversarial nature of a lot of these nations where we're getting these things from, even offices that are maybe a little bit less educated on mining and minerals. this one does always get a bit of a reaction from them. And so in speaking on U.S. Bureau of Mines, one important component of that is that was never dissolved. It was just not funded, right? Congress stopped allocating funding to the U.S. Bureau of Mines. And so what they did was serve as federal experts on mining and minerals issues. The U.S. Bureau of Mines actually popularized the cyanide heap leaching process in the United States. So important processing technology like that. They focused on research and development, or a new agency would focus on extraction, processing, and reprocessing of waste materials, and introducing new feedstocks, reclamation techniques, all of that. And maybe most importantly, it would centralize and coordinate all of this research. I think maybe we all know that universities aren't always the best at communicating with each other. And then, of course, you have the private sector and individual companies doing this innovation as well. This would coordinate all of that information that we're getting and be able to push it out to the larger industry, and really move those innovative pieces forward that would continue to move us toward trust with stakeholders. And from the IWG report, this is one of the recommendations that the WMC is very supportive of. Many of our affiliate organizations are supportive of as well. This quote here in the teal box is directly from the IWG report and making a recommendation to reestablish an agency a la Bureau of Mines. And so speaking to all of those fun administrative tools that are being utilized to achieve policy objectives in this difficult election year, I think one thing to mention here as well is that the WMC is not just engaging on these issues once per year at a fly-in in a 30-minute meeting. We and many other organizations are, and MMSA included in that, submitting comments on these issues throughout the year as these comment periods open up, and as things move. So that's that kind of consistency piece that was on an earlier slide, and multiple touch points. That's incredibly important to be sure that you're getting on the record when those opportunities are available. So I'll not too much belabor these. I think most might be familiar, but just briefly, BLM's proposed conservation and landscape health rule really risks finalized now, will put more lands off limits to mining and other multiple uses. It's definitely the one we and many in Congress obviously are focused on quite heavily. And then you've got the Sage Grouse Draft Resource Management Plan amendment. It's going to continue, and all of these policy objectives that really limit or inhibit mining in the United States. The overarching message here is that they continue to increase our reliance on foreign minerals, and also impede our ability to develop our own infrastructure and renewable projects. But the Sage Grouse Plan directly affects 121 million acres of BLM-administered public lands that contain about 69 million acres of greater sage-grouse habitat management areas in 10 Western states. And that's an incredible landmass. An important message that we always share as well about mining is that mines are place-specific. And I'll call back to when the interagency working group had a site visit after they had published their report and all of their recommendations. Then they actually went and visited an operating mine in Nevada. And one of the questions from a member of that working group was, why did you decide to put the mine here? And that really just kind of highlights the lack of expertise and knowledge within our federal government, and calls back to the need for a Bureau of Mines. Mines are place specific. The minerals are located where they are located. So if we're talking, solar management plan as well, right? And citing solar, sun shines in lots of places, but the minerals only exist where they exist, and they're often only economic where they are economic. And so these kind of sweeping rules that put large swaths of land off limits are very much a risk to the industry. We had the now withdrawn SEC natural asset class rule, but definitely some policies kind of being advanced that are doing effectively the same thing. So creating a natural asset company is similar to the conservation leases, and it is something that not only affects natural resource developers, wind, solar, mining, but you've got the ranching community as well, who's dependent on public land. And then it also changes your access to public land for recreation and any shared use. And so that's a really important one. CEQ's proposed NEPA rule, which really kind of changes NEPA from the National Environmental Policy Act into the National Environmental Protection Act, changing it from a procedural and disclosure law to an environmental protection law requiring specific and environmental outcomes. This new rule would allow new issues also to be raised at any point, even after a NEPA decision. Whereas currently, if you don't comment on an issue during the DEIS process, then you don't get to comment on that in the FEIS process, and that really forces people to engage when we're seeing certainly NGOs taking the route of not engaging in the public and prescriptive NEPA process and instead waiting to litigate at the end of a decision. This really exacerbates that issue. And then calling back as well to some of the previous comments I made about Congress earmarking funding for mining and infrastructure development. This is another example with the 10% tax credit, 45X. It is manufacturing and production of batteries, critical minerals critical minerals are excluded from eligibility for that tax credit. It is manufacturing and processing and manufacturing on. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when I speak to some meetings we had with the Department of Energy while in DC. Many of the recommendations out of the Interagency Working Groups report are specifically harmful to the industry. And then just overall, when we talk about permitting delays, whether that be a BLM office dragging their feet on starting that NEPA clock because they don't want to be held to that 2-year time limit. A lot of the discussion around the IWG report was from the DOI was, well, it doesn't really take that long to develop a mining project, and NEPA does only take that long. But if we've worked on a development project, and I'm going through it right now here in Idaho, we have done 4 years of baseline environmental studies pre-NEPA just to hopefully be able to hold them to that 2-year timeline. So it really just ends up front loading a lot of this stuff before that clock really starts. And another important component here is the WMC also represents members from the coal industry. I will preface that is not my forte, but we absolutely have coal experts within our ranks who put together some really fantastic issue papers that, again, I'll share where folks can get to those. But a lot of the times we see when we are in DC, we are educating about coal, thermal coal, met coal, coal's uses in the energy transition, carbon capture storage, just a lot of education. There's so many misconceptions about coal, of course, but the importance also to grid reliability and with the conversation around critical minerals and the need to produce those materials here, we need reliable, affordable power to be able to process and produce minerals in the United States. And coal is absolutely a key component of our energy mix that needs to be included. And one of the biggest challenges facing that sector is the early retirement due to strenuous and really unachievable regulations out of the EPA. And speaking of agencies, so again, with our fun election year politics that we are trudging through currently, we really placed a great emphasis this year on speaking with agencies, agency leadership and representatives. And so we had meetings. The bottom photo here is from our meeting with the Department of Homeland Security. They are becoming an incredible resource for the industry. They're deploying kind of specialists to each state that are focusing on mining and minerals and supply chains, especially in terms of national security, especially when we have this conversation around we are reliant on so many adversarial nations for these minerals, kind of talking about some of the opposition towards mining and even the public perception around mining, who is maybe funding some of that information. So we had a really fantastic and productive conversation with DHS. And there was, I think, 4 or 5 folks from DHS, several different analysts from different departments, and then one of those regional heads as well. And then we had 2 meetings with Department of Energy, Office of Manufacturing and Supply Chain. We met with Ashley Zumwalt-Forbes. And that is, again, another great example of a place where, you've got one agency, DOE, and kind of 2 different heads. So between manufacturing and energy supply chains, and then fossil energy and carbon management, everyone's talking about critical minerals or strategic, with DOE, strategic materials. But on the MESC side of things, their mandate is limited only to battery material processing and manufacturing. Anything mining exploration on the front end of that is excluded from her mandate. And so that's left arm not knowing what the right arm is doing. And then on the fossil energy and carbon management side, we met with Deputy Secretary Brad Crabtree and several of his staff as well, and learned a lot about what that arm is doing in terms of research and development that was previously done by the U.S. Bureau of Mines. They have a really fantastic Mine of the Future program. And, I think one important message that came out of both of those meetings was that when we have the conversation about the U.S. Bureau of Mines, the DOE has actually assumed a lot of the, training, testing facilities, different infrastructure that was under the U.S. Bureau of Mines, kind of sharing that message out there that DOE would be a good home for the U.S. Bureau of Mines, or the new resurgence of it. It had previously existed under the Department of Interior, which we know to be a little bit more of a challenging agency. And DOE really, with the connections to, energy independence, national security, infrastructure, is much more related to the conversation we're having around minerals and mining today. And then we also had a meeting with U.S. Forest Service, which I think was important because there was a lot of education to be done. I think we can target that meeting a little bit more next year with who is present in the meeting, but it was very much providing accurate information and educating the Forest Service representatives there. So in building these bridges and having these meetings with agencies, I would say the number one important thing is, before you go into these meetings, is understand their mandates. I think we had a concept of MESC, of course, but I don't know, maybe hoped that there was a little bit more wiggle room there in terms of kind of what that program captures in terms of grants and opportunities. But it very much was, my hands are a little bit tied. And so understanding what the mandates are and then tailoring your message to, okay, we understand these are the bounds that you're working within, and here's how we think we can be productive. And then follow-up is also key. So we, as WMC, will begin having quarterly meetings with DHS and our members to continue that conversation, and then revisit back in person next year at our fly-in DC. And then we are having targeted follow-up meetings with DOE and some of our members as well. And maybe one of the best things even that came out of those DOE meetings were introductions to other folks within the agency. As we talked through our issues, it was, oh, this person is really going to be your point on this. And they were actually fantastic at facilitating introductions. And then we are also crafting and preparing to submit our response to MESC's request for information on critical materials market dynamics. And again, that was absolutely a piece of advice we received from our meeting with Ashley Zumwalt-Forbes was, please respond to this RFI. A lot of the points that we brought up in our meeting that might have been outside of her mandate, that is exactly what we're hoping to learn through this RFI process. And then, of course, I would love to extend a very sincere thank you to MMSA for being such a strong supporter of the WMC's fly-in for many, many years. And for the last 2 years, I've personally, in my presidency with WMC, really appreciated kind of the strategy MMSA has taken in kind of focusing more on sponsoring women to go on this fly-in. So all of the costs associated with fly-in, your flights, your hotel, food, Ubers, all of that stuff, that is on our participants to make happen. We have a lot of participants who are independent consultants, and so they are also missing out on wages while they are in DC for this week for the fly-in. And so that makes such a huge difference for our members. We're able to have people, experts and new people get to come thanks to this support from MMSA. So I've added here a quote, and we have, I know one of the thank you letters was already sent directly to MMSA, but we have another one to send you. So just a very direct and sincere thank you for your support, and it makes a big difference. Okay, so we will now shift gears a little bit, but it's really kind of on a lot of the same vein here with what we're talking about. So again, we're in DC talking to elected officials who are elected by their constituents. And so what all of us can do, you know, it's a big lift to organize a fly-in. It's a big lift to take a week out of your day-to-day job to go to DC. It's expensive. It's all of those things. And so what can we be doing regularly, whether as people who work in the industry? I always say every time I get in an Uber, I'm talking about mining, and you know, kind of every time I'm meeting new people, people are always shocked. You know, I lead, I'm like, I'm a gold miner, and no way, you know, like we don't still do that, and just kind of taking all of those opportunities to talk to folks, but kind of more coming from my perspective on the project proponent and operator side. How can we really move away from this very transactional view of stakeholder engagement and move toward this people-centric, kind of seeing the people, communities, tribal nations in the areas in which we operate or are proposing to operate as an opportunity to learn and do better and create more resilient mine plans versus a risk to be mitigated. And so what does this approach to look like? I've listed out just kind of some key principles here, but we'll go through just kind of some general thoughts. So I always say, take a page out of the environmental NGO playbook. We are seeing more and more attacks on mining projects at the exploration phase. This doesn't mean that you know, we need to be out there spending millions of dollars on community investment programs during exploration. But just as NGOs are attacking during exploration, and just as we are identifying minerals during the exploration process, we can begin identifying our stakeholders and our communities. And often, when you just have a few exploration geos in a community and they're out there living in that community, that is where people build their perception of your project, whether it's who actually ends up being the developer or the operator down the road. That's really, that's where the ground is laid there. Be very transparent as well about what you're doing and your timelines. I think one of the other sides of the sword here with engaging early, and we've certainly seen that with Integra in Idaho, is that folks have this perception that, okay, well, you've been out here talking to me for 6 years and you're just now starting NEPA. Why does this take so long? I think that is really beneficial because it's starting to be really transparent about how long this process actually takes. And as you start to develop a sense of ownership with your communities that, you know, I want this project to happen in my community, and that yes, in my backyard concept, they start to really be able to go to bat for you. Pull up a chair at every table you can. I always encourage people, stakeholder engagement practitioners or any company. I think I notoriously say that town halls are stupid. I think they have a point. But everyone has busy lives, especially in often small communities where mines are located. It's that same 10 people concept participating in every different nonprofit or community organization. They are worn out. They have a family they're trying to take care of. And yeah, you want me to go sit there for free and listen to your PowerPoint presentation? I don't think so. So find out where those already existing community dialogue meetings are happening, and then just show up. You don't even have to be on the agenda or have anything to talk about. It's, hey, I'm Emily, and I'm here on behalf of Integra, and I'm just here to listen and learn about the community so that when we do start to develop plans, we can do that with you in mind. And I think that can be a really powerful message. And just the ways that you can provide support and assistance just by being another body, another volunteer, goes absolutely a long way. And on that listening piece, I always, kind of lead with the ask yourself, if someone was building a mine at the end of my street, what would I expect from them? Do I want to hear about this project from the first time from, whatever Department of Transportation when there's some public hearing about it? Or would I rather they at least put something in my mailbox, if not come knock on my door and talk to me, come to the HOA meeting, something, right? And when you meet people at that really late stage, you've kind of lost your opportunity to build a mutually understanding relationship. Engagement is not just your external affairs team's job. It is never enough to just have your community relations person out there doing these things if the plans and the processes your company is putting into place do not represent that. And then also acknowledge, especially in early stage development, we don't have a ton of people, but you can bet I'm putting my permitting manager who's a vegan in front of the Idaho Conservation League, and I'm putting my engineering manager who grew up on a ranch in front of the Owyhee Cattlemen's Association. So really kind of strategically place your people. Number 5, prioritizing engaging with neutral and oppositional stakeholders. We love to talk to people who are supportive of us, and that is incredibly important to foster those relationships because, again, they will go to bat for you, and that's so much more powerful than you coming to go to bat for yourself. But we can learn so much by engaging with neutral and oppositional stakeholders. Neutral have the ability to kind of move in either way. If I don't really know much about mining, I'm going to stay out of that. It's really easy to be kind of co-opted a little bit by a group that's coming in and saying, this is going to be horrible for you and your family, and playing on that emotion a little bit. Allowing space for joint decision making. So again, it's not enough to just listen and ask for feedback and communicate. You actually have to be willing to incorporate that feedback into your very tangible plans. Partnerships should be mutually beneficial. I referenced transactional relationships. One of the things that Integra has done here in Idaho is with our local community relations position in the community nearest our mine, we have her actually function as more of a community program specialist, and on Integra time, she basically just writes grants for community organizations. I don't have $1 million to donate to community organizations, but I have that resource and that tool, and she has been able to go out and get $1 million in grants for a very small rural community. And then get uncomfortable being uncomfortable. It's hard to open ourselves up to criticism, whether you're, just a company, an operator, or a project proponent, or the industry as a whole. But it's incredibly important that we listen actively to perspectives we don't agree with. And if you're not uncomfortable, then you're not doing enough, or you're not talking to the right folks yet. I'm trying to be cognizant of time. So this was my second to last slide here. So engaging with tribal nations. I was at a mining conference speaking with another developer last year, and I said, how's your tribal engagement going? And they told me, oh, we don't have any tribes. We don't have any reservations. We don't have any tribes to talk to or engage with. Categorically not correct. So all land in the United States is tribal land. If you need a starting point and are not sure which tribes have ancestral, traditional, and contemporary territories in the areas of your projects, nativeland.ca is a really great first place to start. But also understanding which tribes have treaties that include land that you're operating on or proposing to operate on. And this is important, tribal nations are sovereign nations, just as it's important for the WMC to go to Washington, D.C. and speak with U.S. government officials. It's important for all of us as project proponents, even, yes, outside of and in conjunction with the prescriptive permitting processes or the NEPA process, to provide that outreach. You're engaging with local communities near your projects, and you need to be engaging with these tribal nations as well. Remember also that you are not their first priority. There are probably 14 other exploration companies knocking on their door, and they're trying to figure out how to fix their water main that just broke, or provide public health to their members, or they're dealing with, another sort of crisis that is very real. There's a fire they're needing to put out right now. So be prepared to reach out again and again. Be prepared to reach out in different ways. Sending a letter is not enough. Sending an email is not enough. You need to make a phone call. You need to go to the events. Just show up and continue to show up, and that'll kind of eventually earn you that relationship through consistency and commitment. Be prepared to be grilled a little bit as well. They want to see if you're willing to walk the walk. They get a lot of different companies, not just mining, but any, natural resource, any project. They get lots of nonprofit organizations, things coming to their doors, telling them that we're going to do things differently and do all these great things. But they're going to test you on that, and you need to be prepared to, just like with stakeholders, allow for joint decision making, allow space for that. Important as well, in the acknowledging sovereignty of tribal nations, make sure that you are understanding, has that tribe signed a treaty? Was that a forced signing or a voluntary signing? Was that treaty ratified? What rights are assigned under that treaty, or what rights does that tribe reserve under that treaty? Are there other projects being proposed in their territories right now, and how are they being engaged? Is that working? Don't, come in and say, oh yeah, we heard that this mining company is talking to you and we're here to talk just like that. That may not have gone very well, and you don't want to necessarily align yourself with that strategy. And then, I think my last point would be, one of the major recommendations within the interagency working group report was that mining's, and I quote, mining's real weakness is in community and tribal engagement. And so we, end quote, we in the United States have many laws and regulations governing how we treat the environment. NEPA does identify, opportunities for public involvement, public comment on projects, but honestly, there are very few laws governing how we treat communities and tribal nations. And mining has an opportunity to right now step up and demonstrate a feasible path forward that works for everyone. We can work in partnership with tribal nations and with communities and propose this path forward rather than waiting for a mandate to come down. Because if the interagency working group's emphasis on community and tribal engagement is not kind of a bat signal enough, these regulations will start to be coming down, and or policy changes. If we don't do that, we really do risk ceding control of our industry to those regulators and other stakeholders, and really spending disproportionate amounts of time and money responding to increased level of scrutiny, litigation, kind of onerous compliance that's put on all of us that maybe doesn't even work for tribes or communities either, rather than actually developing projects that work for people and making money at the end of the day. So yep, just some kind of final takeaways. So bringing it all the way back to the top, we really do have an opportunity in front of us right now as an industry with the kind of greater awareness of the importance of mining and mine materials. And we, through trust, building trust, and through this consistency, can turn that awareness into positive action. We all have a unique story to tell. If you can't make it to the Women's Mining Coalition DC Fly-In in 2025, there are so many opportunities to engage, in your state, with your local legislators, with your county officials, or just in your community itself. We have miners all around us, and people don't even know it, right? So just talking about that and acknowledging that people don't often know mining even happens in the United States still. And then remembering that relationships, whether we're talking with elected officials in DC, community members, tribal nations, it really starts with trust and mutual understanding, and it requires our willingness as an industry to be vulnerable, allow space for feedback and joint decision making, and then follow through and kind of prove it all the way throughout. Because again, to call it to the top, what someone is doing after they've received their permit is really funneling down and affecting everyone else who's trying to permit projects in the United States. And so lastly, here's my contact information if anyone would like to connect or talk further. And then if you would like to view our fly-in materials, issue papers, we provide packets to all of our congressional offices and agencies that we meet with. If you want a copy of that packet, essentially, check us out at wmc-usa.org. And then Lindsay Wright, who I've mentioned within this presentation, is our manager, and her email is below. So I think I'll turn it back for questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Emily. Does anyone have any questions? If you do, we can just type those in the chat. And then as well, Lindsay confirmed earlier that number you were looking for, Emily, was 137.
37. Thank you.
Great. It doesn't look like we have any questions at this moment. So many thanks to Emily Hendrickson for her excellent presentation. Thank you so much to everyone for attending the webinar. We do have several webinars coming up during the next few months. You'll get notices of these webinars, including the one for tomorrow. Tomorrow's webinar is on mine closure. They're generally scheduled for the third Friday over the next few months. All of our webinars are uploaded to YouTube and can be accessed through the MMSA.net website. The video of this webinar will also be on the website within the week. The MMSA websites are supported by the MMSA Jacqueline Foundation, and we'll send you a notice when the video and slides are posted on the website. Thank you. The webinar is now over.